Today's story takes us back approximately 150 years ago to this small little village just outside of Kiev in Ukraine. There was a fine Jew, his name was Reb Moshe, who had an Airbnb together with his wife and 3 little children. Moshe was an honest man, a hard worker. He did what he can to provide for his family and take care of the guests that came to his Airbnb with food and lodging. One particular October-November time in the Hebrew month of Cheshvan, beginning of winter, rain was already falling, snow was already falling. Moshe did not expect any unexpected visitors, but sure enough, he hears a knock on the door, and the famous Reb Naftali of Rupshitz comes to his Airbnb. He was delighted. He almost could not get enough of this excitement that he has the great honor of hosting the Reb Naftali. And so he prepares a beautiful meal for him, gives him the best room in the house. And after Reb Naftali says, "Listen, I need you to do me a favor. Can you please go to the nearest town and get a silver snuff box for me?" And Moshe thinks to himself, it's late at night, a silver snuff box, why do you need it now? But he knows better than to ask any questions from the great Rebbe. And he's more than happy to oblige to his request. And so he puts on his coat, puts on his boots, and he gets ready to leave. He goes into his carriage, he hitches the horse and the wagon, and he begins to go to the big city to see if he can find the silver snuff box for the Reb Naftali. As he's driving, he seems like he must have dozed off. All of a sudden he hears a cry for help. He thinks he may be daydreaming, but sure enough he hears the voice again, and so he stops his horse and wagon, and he follows the noise with his lantern, and he comes closer to the noise, and he sees that there's a beautiful carriage that is stuck in the mud, with the horses trying as much as they can to get out of the mud. The harder it's trying, the deeper it's falling into the mud. This well-dressed man comes out of the carriage. The carriage driver is already all full of mud. This well-dressed man comes out, and he sees someone coming with a lantern. He says, "Oh, thank you. Can you please help us? We're stuck here. My wife and kids are in this wagon. Please help us." And so Moshe says, "Sure." And he goes back to his horse. He hitches the horses. He brings the horses to this carriage. Now there's 4 horses together. He hitches them up, and with a strong whip of his whip, he gets the horses out together. All the horses work in unison and get the carriage out. Now they're soaking wet. The family, this noble-looking man with his wife and kids, are soaking wet. And so they say, "Listen, please do us a favor. Bring us to someplace where we can rest for the night." So Moshe puts them into his carriage. He turns around and goes back to his Airbnb. When he comes in, he takes care of them, makes a beautiful meal, warms them up, gives them a warm set of clothing, and makes a room for them to sleep for the night. Moshe is by this point exhausted from all he has gone through, and he's about to go to sleep. He totally forgot about his mission to get the silver snuff box. He's about to fall asleep. He hears a knock on the door, and it's Reb Naftali of Rupshitz, the Rebbe's assistant, that says the Rebbe would like to see you. He immediately forgot about his mission. He feels terrible. He comes to Reb Naftali. He's about to apologize. Reb Naftali says, "Listen, tomorrow morning, when this nobleman asks you to pay for his stay, only charge him for the food and for the night stay. Don't take any more money from him." Moshe says, "Okay, no problem." The next morning, the nobleman asks Moshe for the bill, and Moshe gives him the bill for the food and the sleeping. The nobleman looks at it and says, "How much do I owe you for saving my life and taking care of me?" And Moshe says, "Nothing." The nobleman takes out of his pocket $1,000, a huge amount of money. Moshe never saw this much money in one shot. And he gives it to Moshe, says, "No, please, I don't want to take any payment. Only pay me for the room and for the food, that's it." The nobleman said, "But you saved me. My wife and my kids were drenched. I don't know what would have happened to us. We would have froze that night in the wilderness by being stuck in the mud. Please take it." And Moshe says, "No." The nobleman says, "At least let me take your name and your address, and at least let me take that." And Moshe gives it to him, and the nobleman leaves happily and goes on his way. 10 years pass. By this point, Moshe, who was renting the Airbnb from a landlord, his business started to go sour. and he couldn't afford his payments anymore. The landowner said, either you pay me or I'm throwing you into debtor's dungeon. Moshe doesn't know what to do. The landlord says, I'll give you 2 days to come up with the money, or I'm taking you and your 2 sons into the dungeon, and in 2 weeks your wife has time to collect the money. If she can't, I'm going to kill you and take your sons and give them to the church. They should convert to Christianity. Moshe does not know what to do. By this point, Reb Naftali already had passed away. So he can't go to him for a blessing. 2 days passed. The Moshe, of course, did not come up with the money. Here's a knock on the door. They grab Moshe and his 2 sons and they bring him to the landlord, who throws him into the dungeon. And Moshe is stuck in this cold room, not knowing what to do, huddled with his 2 kids. Begins to pray to God, asking God to please help him out of this terrible situation that he's in. 2 weeks pass and Moshe still does not have any assistance. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He hears a knock on the door. Moshe thinks that's it, his time is near. The man says, tell me, what's your name? He says, my name is Moshe. And then all of a sudden the voice disappears. Moshe thought he's hallucinated by this point, being starved like this, and so he doesn't think about it. The next morning, all of a sudden the door to the dungeon gets banged down. Moshe is grabbed by his arms. His 2 kids are taken out of the dungeon, brought into a wagon, and they're sped off somewhere else. Moshe turns around, he sees that he's free from the landlord's clutches, but he has no idea what's going on. He picks up his head and this man is looking across him and he says, do you recognize me? Moshe says, no. So the nobleman says, 10 years ago, I came to your inn. I was stuck in the mud and you brought me to your inn and saved my life with my wife and my kids. I was on my way to Kiev and some reason my horse went off the wrong way and stopped at your inn for the night. I looked at the inn, I recognized it. I said, oh, this is the place where Moshe had saved me. But as I opened the door, I saw that you no longer owned this inn. It was owned by somebody else. So I asked him, what's going on over here? And the man told me your whole story, and I said, I have to save you. This is my chance to repay you for the kindness that you had showed me so many years earlier. And so I found out where you were, and I hired a few big, strong guys to help me take you and bring you to safety. And so this is what I've done. But because I've noticed your honesty by not wanting to take the money so many years earlier, I want to hire you to manage my estates, and I will give you and your wife and your kids a house. You can live on my property, manage my estates, and you'll be able to be taken care of forever. And of course, this is what happened. And Moshe now is so overcome with emotions, and he thanks Hashem for saving his life, saving his family, and for listening to what the tzaddik said so many years earlier, who will now have been repaid for his kindness and for what he had done, and for his honesty, and now he's able to live